You're right.
Thank you, Dr. Alfano. Thank you very much for your time, and we are here as the board of directors for the HOA, and we're streaming to the homeowners to hear any information you can offer us with your expertise on roofing. After our suffering from Hurricane Ian, we are having issues here, and currently our design standards allow for cement or clay flat tiles on the roofing, and we're seeking your expertise on advice and experience on hurricane, wind, high winds, and other materials that might satisfy some needs that we have.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
So is there a specific question, or you just kind of want me to ramble?
Well, you go ahead and speak first, and then we'll ask questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So my understanding is that you were between either like clay or concrete, metal, or asphalt compositions, and there's pros and cons to each of them. Those products are able to meet your requirements of what you need in South Florida, specifically related to high winds. So with regards to concrete and clay tiles, those have typically a very long service life. So they can, assuming they don't have any major issues, can last sometimes up to about 50 years. What ultimately drives the performance of clay and concrete tiles is degradation of the underlayment and the flashing details. So oftentimes you'll see with those roof systems, you will have leaks that may develop where like a wall transitions to a roof section or around a vent stack, or if you guys have chimneys, sometimes some flashing details around there. So, and that's just due to normal thermal expansion and contraction. And so over time, that may be a maintenance issue that you'll have to address. Usually around every 10 years or so, we'll find that small leaks can develop, and those are manageable. You're able to repair those pretty quickly, but they do perform pretty well with respect to wind forces. Now, there is a variety of different ways that a concrete or clay tile can be applied to the roof. The most common, and in my opinion, the best way to do it is to use a spray foam adhesive. And so simply what they do is on top of your underlayment, they will put a foam that will expand, and it will come in contact on the back side of the tile, and it will bond that tile to the roof. And that lasts a very long time. Assuming that you get good contact with the adhesive, it's a very, very good system, and it will give you wind resistance up to about 120 to 130 miles an hour, which for the most common type of storms, a tropical storm, a category 1 storm, it's going to be more than enough. Now, if you have another Ian, you may have some issues where some of those tiles will become windborne, but there's very few roofing products out there that are going to be able to withstand a category 5 hurricane. So in terms of return periods and capabilities of a category 5 hurricane, it is relatively low, but it is non-zero for you guys in Florida. So that's just something to consider. So those are, I understand right now, some issues with getting the supply chain up and running. So I do understand that. The one other issue you have with the tiles is that over time, they're gonna break if you have someone up there pressure washing them, if you're doing any maintenance, just regular thermal stresses. If you have a palm tree that's over the house, you could have a tile that breaks. So as long as you have extra tiles on hand, you are able to do individual repairs, and you have no issues with your roof. Now, if the manufacturer stops making that specific product, or you run out of spare tiles and you can't source additional ones, you may have issues trying to do repairs because you may not be able to have a tile of a matching profile in order to do those repairs. So that is one limitation for individual repairs of concrete and clay tiles. If I had to have a choice between clay and concrete, I would go with the concrete. They are a little bit easier to do maintenance on. They're a little bit hardier, they're easier to walk on. So if people are going to be out there pressure washing, it is much easier to walk on a concrete roof than it is on a ceramic tile. So, or clay tile, not ceramic tile, my bad. So those are kind of the things to think about. There are also asphalt composition shingles. I'm sorry, before I go on to clay, or leave clay and concrete, I think you said all of your roofs have those right now, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so then this would be a non-issue, but they are heavier, so if you had asphalt comp and you wanted to go to a concrete tile, you would probably have to have an engineer make sure that you had capacity, but that's a moot point. Concrete and clay tile roofs are also fairly expensive, so that's something to keep in mind as well. Now, for asphalt composition shingles, that's going to be the cheapest option for you. So I think generally it's anywhere between $20,000 and $30,000 to replace an asphalt comp roof, depending on the size. And you're never really going to have issues with supply chain with asphalt comp shingles. They are readily available almost all of the time. I've never heard of anyone not being able to get shingles. So that's a perk of using asphalt comp. One of the downfalls is that, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with asphalt composition shingles, is that they get their wind resistance by what is called a sealant strip. And so on the underside of the shingles, there is a thin strip of asphalt. And when that heats up, it becomes tacky, and that's what gives you the bond between your shingles. So your overlying and underlying shingles, and that's what gives you your wind resistance. So various manufacturers will have warranties anywhere from 5, 10, or 15 years. But we do see that around that time frame, sometimes between 5 and 15 years, those shingles will lose the bond. So that sealant strip does start to break down. And that's why most of those wind warranties are only 10, to 15 years. A roofing manufacturer, shingle manufacturer will warrant your shingles, sometimes for 50 years. But that's not the wind warranty. And so that's something to keep in mind, is that shingles, after about 10 to 15 years, they're going to start to lose a lot of their wind resistance. They'll still perform well in rain and most thunderstorms, but for those really strong hurricanes, they're not going to be the most resilient. So, but that being said, they're also cheap, and they're, if you lose it, it's easy to go ahead and just get it replaced very quickly. They do wear out over time. So from my experience in Florida, asphalt comp shingles, their service life is anywhere from 10 to maybe 20, 25 years, depending on specific product and manufacturer that you go with. If you do choose to go with an asphalt composition shingle, I would stay away from 3-tab shingles. Go with a laminated shingle, or an architectural shingle, they're sometimes referred to. Those are thicker, they're heavier, and they have a much better performance in wind and longevity. So I would say, if you are going to go that route, do not go with a 3-tab. So the last product is metal. There's 2 kind of varieties that you'll see in residential construction. You have what's called a standing seam, and that's simply you have one long piece of aluminum or steel, and they fold the ends up on themselves and create a seam. They also will seam along the bottom, where the gutter, if you guys have gutters, they'll seal along that. And so you get a very, very good, nice, clean appearance to the roof. It has very good wind resistance. If I had the option of what I wanted to do on my roof, I would always go with a standing seam roof. It is a good product. The other option for a metal roof is where you have what's called R panels, and those will be screwed in. So those also do very well in wind conditions. The one issue is that with those, when they are mechanically fastened like that, there is a rubber washer between the underside of the screw and the metal panels. And over time, that washer will start to break down. And so in about 10 to 15 years, you're gonna have to take all of those screws out and refasten them so that you don't get leaks develop. So that's why that's not my preferred metal roofing system. It does do well. I was in Sanibel and I looked at several metal roofs that were the R panel that did very, very well. And so it's also an alternative, but if I had the choice of my metal roof products, I would go with a standing seam product. The one downfall to those is that when they do fail, they will fail pretty catastrophically, meaning that with your tiles and your shingles, when they fail, you can get maybe clusters that will fail, but in some cases you'll have the entire roof covering will come off, but a lot of times it's just a couple shingles here, a couple tiles here. With metal panels, when they fail, it goes from the eave all the way up to the ridge, and it's usually several panels. And so you will have a lot of your roof covering that is displaced in those cases. But steel, a good standing seam steel roof is resistant up to about 140 miles an hour. So it's a very, very good product. The one potential downfall to those as well is that they're easily dented. So if you had, you guys don't get a ton of hail, but if you did get hail, it could be dented, and unless you replace those metal panels, those dents are going to be there for the duration of the roof. So I think that's basically kind of my overall summary of each of those roof types.
How familiar are you with the recycled composite material roof? Do you know anything about it?
Which one is that? Is that like a rubber roof?
I refer to it as plastic, but recycled plastics.
I am not very familiar with those. I've only seen a handful. They do well. The problem is there's not a lot of information on their long-term performance because they are a relatively new product. So we have seen some plastic-based products that mimic a slate roof.
Yep.
And those have done, some of them have done well, but most of them have become very brittle as they age, and so it's difficult to walk on them safely, and they also will break very easily in winds that are moderate to severe. So I looked at a couple of those in Wilmington after Florence, which was a Category 1 hurricane, and there was a lot of damage to those. The issue also with those, since they're not a very common product, it may be difficult to do repairs. And if it's difficult to repairs, I've seen that a lot of times insurance policies will be a little bit more expensive because they know that if there is even minor damage, instead of doing spot repairs, they're going to have to come through and do a total roof replacement. So you may have very expensive policies or very high deductibles. So an example for that is that we do a lot of wood shake roofs up here in the Twin Cities, and the insurance rates are very, very high for those because one, I mean, they're a fire hazard, but two, because a lot of people don't know how to do individual repairs, and so often what happens is when they're damaged, they'll just have to do a tear off and replace the entire roof. So that's something to keep in mind.
And then regarding metal roofs, are you familiar with the stone-coated steel and permatile? Is that the
Yes.
one? Permatile. And can you give us some information?
I've seen those because those do mimic the appearance of a tile roof. So it's a metal roof that does look like a tile. So those generally do very well because they're all kind of they kind of bend and form them all in together, so it does perform decently in moderate winds. I have not seen how they perform in like a strong like Category 3 or Category 4 hurricane. Some issues with those is that they are not as common, so sourcing that material may be a challenge, and finding a knowledgeable person to do any repairs, if necessary, may also be a challenge as well. But they do pretty well. Those would be similar to a tile and a shingle roof that if they were blown off, it's not going to be an entire slope is going to be exposed. You'll usually just have some, some portion of the roof that's exposed, and the rest of it should hopefully still be protected.
Okay. And I had sent you, I think, 3 or 4 questions. Do you happen to have them? Did you look at those? Did you have time?
Let me pull up my email. So you said you had a specific question?
Yeah, Todd, I'll let you ask. I sent her all your questions.
I think he answered most of them. This is Todd Reinhardt, by the way. I think you did clarify that your preference as a engineer who's went to the Miami University and obviously understands hurricanes was your preference if you were to put a roof on would be metal. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. The other thing that I had was there's been a strategy taken within the community of homes being left with just the underlayment exposed to the elements. And I was just wondering what your opinion is on that strategy.
Okay, so that is not really a good thing. I don't know, do you know what the underlayment is? Is it a granule coated rolled roofing product, or is it the felt, or is it a synthetic?
It's Tyrex.
Okay, so those typically can only be exposed to, if it's what I'm thinking of, there's like a GFS product and a couple other, it's kind of a white appearance. Those will start to break down when exposed to solar radiation. They are not supposed to be your primary weathering surface, so those absolutely need to be covered in some way. You cannot have those exposed. And then if you also, I don't know, were your tiles, were they secured with mechanical fasteners, or were they mortar or spray foam?
The age of our houses, they've all been secured with nails or screws.
But some some are with foam. Mine was with foam.
Okay. Okay, so if you have nails and those tiles are missing, you now have a bunch of nail holes where water can get into. So you absolutely do not want to keep that exposed like that. If you can get a tarp on it, there might be someone that can come up and put some mastic on there or something. That's obviously going to be a temporary repair, but you do not want to leave those exposed.
And my other question was, we're obviously, and I'm sure you're aware, maybe not in Minnesota, but we're under some pressures, obviously, from the insurance industry in regards to them wanting to make sure that claims are settled in a good period of time, and I would assume that they probably don't want roofs exposed to the 2023 hurricane season. So along with that, time is of the essence in order to, get roofs replaced so that we're in a good spot in 2023.
Mm-hmm. So was there a question, or?
I think it's just from your perspective, when you go to the underlayment issue, exposing it to the elements for any particular time is of the essence in order to get that roof on and not expose it to the Florida elements, correct?
Yes, yeah, you absolutely want to get that covered.
And regarding metal, was it just the standing seam when you compare it to cement and clay tile, the standing seam metal, or all metal?
Generally, all the metal has, I've done probably about 4 or 5 major hurricanes now, metals have performed generally better than the clay and concrete up to about a certain point. And then, once winds get high enough and you're in a category 4, category 5, you're going to have failure of both those different roof systems. So it's almost inevitable. So what I did see with tile is that you're going to lose the tiles usually along your windward edges of the roof, and they're going to flip back and then they're going to damage other tiles adjacent to them. But the vast majority of the roofs that I've seen still remain covered, so you may not have as many issues with water ingress in those. And you're still going to have water ingress, but it's usually not as severe. With the metal, when that does get displaced, especially the standing seam, it almost peels it back like, like a sardine can. And so now you have an entire slope from eave to ridge that is exposed. And if you don't have, a good double layer underlayment, if you haven't done any extra waterproofing measures, you can have issues with water ingress. So something you may want to consider is that there is a program called Fortified. It's a voluntary type standard, and it's a guide for people to design and build their structures above code. So for you guys, what may be beneficial is to go with, obviously your homes are constructed, they don't need to be repaired, but the roofs do need to be repaired and replaced. So you can come back with what's called a fortified bronze level. And so what they do is that they'll recommend, a better, more wind resistant roof covering, but they also have provisions on having extra waterproofing. So if you do lose your shingles or your tiles or your metal, that you're gonna hopefully limit the amount of water that comes into the system. And so that's been adopted in coastal Alabama with very, very good results. And some insurance carriers, and I don't know about Florida, but some insurance carriers will give you a discount on your homeowner's insurance if you have a bronze level roof. So that's something that may be worth looking into. I don't know the specifics of Florida per se on their fortified standard, but I know it has been extremely successful in Alabama, and it actually has improved the home cost. Realtors now are able to advertise that the home is fortified, and I think it was like 10% increase in the value of the home by doing a fortified roof. So it has now become a market point for them.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. In doing my diligence for this board meeting, first, Marilyn Stout and a member of the board, in doing my investigation, I contacted our Lee County property appraiser. And Matt responded to me. He has been an elected property appraiser for about 6 years, but prior to that, his profession was property appraising for over 20 years. So this was what he sent back to me in an email when I asked him. My question was, do you have a position on roofing, metal versus composite versus concrete tile versus asphalt? His response was, metal is the absolute best, in my opinion. Just look at the roofs that survived on the islands, overwhelmingly metal. So consequently, with the property appraiser living in Lee County, a native of Lee County, knows it pretty well. And I was pleased, to be honest, I was pleased with his response.
I'm glad we were in agreement too.
Also, I have one quick comment. It's just for clarification purposes. There was a comment made at the beginning that only concrete and clay tiles are approved. On November 10th, a majority of the board voted to go to add metal and composite as additional approved materials. And my understanding that this particular step was in order to develop standards and specs so that when we go on Thursday, we kind of have a guideline to go by based on those materials. Is that my understanding from everybody else?
I have an observation. This is John Elkins, also a board member. I had a meeting with a number of roofers and talking just about different roofing materials. And the subject of attachment of clay, of concrete tile came up. And we've heard, as you have, that the foam is the preferred method. In fact, it has performed well. However, the latest is that Miami-Dade, who now has foam as their code, would like to see it changed because that foam after time deteriorates and becomes less effective than nails or screws. Do you have any comment on that?
I haven't seen anything about that. I know mortar, that is definitely the case. Mortar will lose its bonds over time. I have not seen anything about the foam losing its effectiveness over time.
Okay. It's worth checking.
I'm not saying it's not the case. I am not aware of that. I know the issue with the one issue that I have had with nails and screws is that when there is a leak that will develop, it's very difficult if there's water coming in somehow underneath the tiles. The tiles are not waterproof. Water is going to go underneath them. You have that second layer of weatherproofing, which is your underlayment, and that's why usually it's the granule coated underlayment. If there is water getting in and there's some type of breakdown along that interface with the fastener and the underlayment, water can be coming in there, but it's very difficult to do a repair because it's hard to figure out which exact nail is leaking. And so that has been one of the challenges that I have seen time and time again, is that there's leaking of a tile roof. There's no really visible issue on the surface of the roof, and it's something to do with the mechanical fastening of those tiles there. So, and then the mechanically fastened tiles usually are not as wind resistant because they are not bonded in any way, shape, or form. So they can be lifted in the wind.
Makes sense. That makes sense.
So, but to my knowledge, there is, at least I haven't seen anything about deterioration of the spray foam. So I mean, I definitely can look in to see that, but I am not aware of anything at this point.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Good.
Grady?
No, I have no questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Alfano, for your time. We appreciate it very much.
Yeah, good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Very nice. Bill, did you see about whether or not
Are we done with the meeting?
erosion
Yes.
would be
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, John.